After working for the company for 30 years, my boss handed me a $50 bill as my retirement package. "This is all you're worth. The contract says so," he laughed. I simply nodded, took my belongings, and left without saying a word. The next morning, the entire team I had built suddenly resigned. My phone was flooded with 66 missed calls and 57 emails. I had spent 3 decades at a manufacturing company in my hometown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable. Day after day, year after year, I showed up on time, took extra shifts, and helped train new employees whenever management asked. Over time, I developed a deep sense of loyalty toward the company. Some people switched jobs to climb the career ladder, but I stayed, believing that my dedication would be recognized when I eventually retired. In the early years, I was hired by the original manager, who believed in giving people a fair chance to grow. He respected experience and encouraged me to share ideas to improve operations. The workplace had a warm atmosphere back then, employees felt heard, turnover was low, and most of us were proud of what we produced. I was never a big talker, but I pitched in wherever I was needed, slowly mastering every process. As the years passed, I moved up to a supervisory role. I got a small pay raise, but I still saw myself as an ordinary worker, just one with a bit more responsibility. My job was to guide younger employees and keep the production line running smoothly. We handled heavy machinery, ensured quality control, and managed shipping schedules. I often took on the dirtiest or most tedious tasks myself to show new hires that I wasn't above them. This built a strong sense of teamwork, and I found fulfillment in helping others learn. Things changed when the original owners retired and a new boss took over. He arrived full of self-importance, constantly talking about productivity metrics and modernizing our old ways. We quickly realized that his focus was on numbers, not people. He reorganized departments without consulting anyone, replaced experienced staff with his own acquaintances, and seemed to view older workers as a burden. Morale dropped. Several long-time employees left. But I stayed, partly out of habit and partly because I believed I could hold on until retirement. In my final year, the new boss kept hinting that I should consider retiring. He used polite words like, "It's time for you to relax," or "You've done enough," but I knew he wanted to push out higher-paid veterans. Still, I decided to complete 30 years before leaving. By then, I had trained dozens of employees, helped shape our best practices, and felt I had earned at least a proper farewell. On my last day, the boss called me into a conference room. I assumed I'd find some paperwork, maybe receive a parting gift or a check reflecting my years of service. Instead, he slid a thin envelope across the table. Inside, I found a single $50 bill. No letter, no note, just $50. Before I could speak, he said, "This is all you're contractually worth," then let out a laugh that sent a chill down my spine. I was so taken aback that I could barely respond. I remember feeling numb, but I forced myself to stay composed. I nodded, took the $50, and quietly began collecting my belongings. I headed to my desk to clear out photos, certificates, and personal items I had gathered over 3 decades. A few coworkers approached, sensing something was wrong. I was too unsettled to explain, so I simply told them I was leaving. Murmurs of shock and anger spread through the room. I walked out to my car carrying a small box of memories, wondering how I would tell my wife and father that all my dedication had amounted to nothing more than a crumpled bill. It felt like a betrayal, but I was too drained for a confrontation. At home, my wife was furious. She urged me to consult my uncle, a 65-year-old attorney and my father's youngest brother. Though not a high-powered lawyer, he was experienced enough to spot contractual irregularities. He asked if I had copies of any documents outlining my retirement terms. I didn't. So, he advised sending a formal request to the company for my records before deciding if legal action was an option. That night, I lay in bed, torn between anger and embarrassment. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages from coworkers. While I was still processing my own emotions, they announced they had all quit. They gathered their belongings, walked out, and turned in resignation letters. It wasn't a staged protest, just a spontaneous show of solidarity. These were the very people I had trained and looked out for over the years. Their decision shocked me. I hadn't asked them to do anything, yet their mass departure left the factory severely understaffed. Soon after, my boss started calling me frantically, over 60 times in one morning. His voicemails were desperate. He said we needed to negotiate, that the company couldn't function without a full team and was falling behind on production. That same day, I received emails from him insisting there had been a misunderstanding. It was a stark contrast to the smug smirk he had worn the day before. I ignored all his attempts to contact me. Instead, I focused on gathering my employment records. I met with my uncle, who suggested filing a formal request for my complete employee record, including any contract modifications over the years. We suspected that either the boss had never updated older contracts or he had deliberately tried to bypass the company's actual retirement policy. Meanwhile, my former coworkers kept calling me, saying the factory was in chaos. Major clients were furious over delayed shipments, and the few remaining employees were overwhelmed. Apparently, the boss was now accusing me of orchestrating a walkout, acting as if I had planned some grand mutiny. My uncle advised me to keep my distance until we had a clearer understanding of the legal situation. He didn't want me to go back and face any confrontation alone, especially with tensions running high. My father, now in his late 70s, worried about how all of this would affect my health. I understood his concern, but I assured him that I wasn't shaken, just deeply offended. I had given everything, my time, effort, and loyalty, and in return, my boss had treated me like I was disposable. Still, I was trying to stay level-headed, letting my uncle handle the legal discussions while I focused on finding ways to stay financially stable. A few days later, we received a letter from the company's legal team claiming that the official retirement plan had certain limitations and that I apparently didn't meet them. Something felt off. My uncle demanded specific pages from my employee file. When those arrived, he immediately noticed discrepancies, odd page numbers, formatting inconsistencies, and signature blocks that didn't match. It looked like someone had replaced parts of my original contract with altered versions. There were clear signs of forgery, though we would need a more thorough analysis to prove it definitively. If those altered documents were indeed forgeries, the company was in serious legal trouble. We could claim breach of contract or even fraud. However, a long and expensive court battle wasn't appealing. My uncle walked me through the pros and cons of filing a lawsuit. We had a strong case, but the legal process could drag on for years. On the other hand, letting my boss get away with this felt wrong, especially after how he had humiliated me and disregarded my decades of dedication. As we weighed our options, the boss escalated his tactics. He sent more letters through his attorney, accusing me of orchestrating my team's resignation out of spite. He even suggested I had taken company secrets, though I had only removed my personal belongings. My uncle countered immediately. He warned that if these baseless accusations continued, we would consider filing a defamation claim. We demanded evidence. The boss had none, and the accusations disappeared. Around this time, a longtime friend who had previously worked with me reached out about a job opportunity at a distribution center in another state. He said they were looking for someone with my experience to manage logistics and quality control. I was hesitant to relocate, but I agreed to an initial conversation with their HR team. They seemed eager to have me on board. My wife also believed the change would do me good. Still, I was reluctant to leave home. I decided to wait and see if I could first resolve the situation with my old company. Not long after, the company's legal team proposed a private settlement. My uncle and I discussed our conditions. We wanted an official acknowledgement that they had mishandled my employment records. The boss resisted, but the board of directors, or key investors, must have realized the gravity of a potential scandal involving contract tampering. After some back and forth, they sent a letter admitting to inconsistencies in my paperwork. It wasn't a sweeping apology, but it was a start. We arranged a meeting at my uncle's office. The boss arrived looking exhausted, accompanied by an attorney who spoke on his behalf. They offered a settlement for my 30 years of service, hoping to avoid a public court battle. The amount wasn't huge, but it was far more than $50. I saw it as a compromise. Not as much as I felt I deserved, but enough to help me transition to a new job or partial retirement if needed. Part of me wanted to throw the check back at them and pursue legal action out of principle. But my uncle and wife reminded me that continuing the fight would be time-consuming and emotionally draining. They encouraged me to take the deal, one that at least acknowledged my service, rather than get lost in a grueling court process. So I accepted. The boss mumbled a half-hearted apology, something along the lines of, "I'm sorry for the confusion," but he never truly owned up to his behavior. I walked out of that office with mixed emotions. I was relieved it was over, but still hurt that my decades of loyalty had ended so unceremoniously. After finalizing the settlement, I decided to take the job at the distribution center. My wife was open to moving, especially since she felt I deserved a fresh start somewhere I'd be treated with respect. We rented out our house to a friend who needed a place, then relocated. The new job was decent. They valued my practical experience and made sure I felt welcome. While it was a major shift after 30 years in one place, I found it surprisingly refreshing. A few months later, my father visited and noted that I seemed calmer. In the end, I never got a triumphant send-off from my old workplace. No plaque, no heartfelt speech. Instead, I walked away with a settlement I practically had to force out of them. The boss tried to save face, but his reputation took a serious hit. The story of how he had handed me a $50 bill and laughed spread quickly among local vendors and competing companies. The mass resignation of my colleagues left the factory in crisis, with major production issues and angry clients. I heard from a friend that management struggled to replace the skilled workers they had lost. Many applicants learned about the toxic work environment and turned down job offers. Even clients started seeking alternative manufacturers. The board of directors was reportedly evaluating the boss's performance more critically. While I took no pleasure in seeing the company struggle, I felt a measure of justice, knowing that he was facing the consequences of mistreating his employees. A few months into my new job, I received a curt email from him. It read something like, "Let's put the past behind us. We'd appreciate any help or referrals you can offer." I promptly deleted it. I had no interest in helping him bail out the company he had nearly run into the ground. My focus was on moving forward, embracing this second chapter of my life, and leaving the bitterness behind. I found that most of my coworkers who had resigned en masse quickly landed new jobs. Some joined me at the distribution center, while others switched industries entirely. They told me they had no regrets about walking out. In fact, some admitted that if they had stayed, they might have remained trapped in a toxic environment for years, never realizing how much better they could be treated elsewhere. Many of them thanked me for training and guiding them in their careers. Hearing that reminded me of something important. While the boss may have devalued me, my fellow workers recognized and appreciated my contributions. Looking back, I see how much can change when a single person in power decides to treat employees like numbers. The new boss could have quietly let me retire with dignity. He could have offered a modest check, given a short speech in front of the staff, and shown a bit of gratitude. Instead, he chose to mock my years of service. I didn't need a parade, but I certainly deserved more than a crumpled bill handed over in an empty conference room. His actions set off a wave of resignations, customer complaints, and legal headaches that left the company scrambling. At the same time, I don't pretend that I won some grand victory. I'm still nursing a sense of betrayal. Part of me believes that if the original owners had stayed, this never would have happened. They valued the workers who dedicated their lives to the business. Yet life rarely goes as planned. This experience taught me valuable lessons: set clear boundaries, keep proper documentation, and never rely solely on an employer's goodwill, no matter how many years you invest. Despite how unsettling my departure was, I walked away with something far more important: the realization that my worth isn't tied to a company that can discard me on a whim. My true value lies in my expertise, my reputation, and the relationships I've built with people who respect me. In the end, the best revenge wasn't taking legal action. It was watching so many people move on to better opportunities, depriving a careless boss of the very workforce that kept his operation running. I share this story as a caution to others. If you ever sense that you're being pushed aside or treated unfairly, don't rely on verbal promises. Get everything in writing. If something feels off, consult a lawyer. I wish I had done that sooner, though I'm grateful my uncle was there to step in when I finally realized I had been shortchanged. Today, my wife and I have settled into a new routine. I've adjusted to the differences at the distribution center, and my manager genuinely appreciates my experience. Sometimes, I catch myself wondering how things might have gone if I had confronted the boss earlier, but dwelling on the past won't change anything. Instead, I focus on what's ahead, meeting new coworkers, maintaining good relationships with my family, and making the most of the years I have left in the workforce. As for my old boss, even though he's lost a lot of respect in our old town, I doubt he's truly learned a lesson about treating employees fairly. More likely, he's just trying to keep his board of directors off his back. Whatever the case, I'm content to let him face the consequences of his own actions. My father once told me something wise: people who mistreat others will always reveal themselves in time. And that's exactly what happened. He revealed his lack of respect for his employees. And now, everyone knows it.